For Family by Nanook 888. Chapter 17. The Value of Truth. The Force ricocheted all of Palpatine's hands and secret agents who tapped into the dark side, whereas the tiniest insects compared to the two giants who were the Dark Lords of the Sith, and at the passing of one of its primary conduits, the Force raged a violent tempest to fill the sudden void. Racing towards the Death Star in hyperspace, Luke gasped, his shaking hands grasping for support. The Force roared through him. He felt the powerful recoil as a great outlet was closed off to the dark side as the Force heaved an enormous shift. What had happened to his father? To Leia? He gradually registered that the others were speaking to him. He also realized that he was clenching Tran's arm in one hand and the back of a chair with the other, that Tran was practically holding him up in return. Luke forced his hands to loosen, to support himself with his own legs. He kept himself firmly anchored to the light side of the Force, continuously washing the soothing energy through himself in an effort to regain his calm. He had learned his lesson on Geonosis. He would not be inducing the dark side again. "I'm sorry, did I hurt you?" he managed to ask. Tran shook his head, too worried about Luke to notice whether his arm hurt or not. "Skywalker?" Madine asked uncertainly, not liking the haunted look in those blue eyes. "I'm all right." Luke tried to steady his voice. "It's the Force." He stared off into the distance, seeing and feeling things that only he could perceive. "We must hurry." Leia could only stare in numb shock as Darth Vader, the infallible, invincible Darth Vader, dropped with a resounding thud to the smooth Durasteel floor. His lightsaber rolled from loose fingers and came to rest by her foot. That dark presence she had known and feared for so long, who only in the last few moments had started to become more than just someone to hate, was gone. No! She had no idea what she was feeling. After everything that had transpired between them, all she could think of was that her father had come for her. Vader had fought to protect her, and he had paid with his life. He couldn't be dead. Could he? "Goodbye, my unfaithful apprentice," Sidious spat. He flicked a finger. The heavy armored body sailed over the banister of the bridge and tumbled like a dead weight down the gaping hole of the reactor shaft. That inconvenience taken care of, the Sith Master turned away. It was pure instinct. Not taking her eyes off the Emperor's hunched back as he ambled back up the stairs, Leia fought the stepping pains rippling all through her and the intense blaze of her unhealed shoulder to reach for Vader's lightsaber. Her fingers slowly, firmly, closed around it. The metal was stone cold, as if it hadn't been held by living flesh in a long time. The hilt was larger than Luke's, and the activation switch was located further around. But it was there, reassuringly solid beneath her thumb. But she didn't press it yet. She would have to bide her time, wait for an opportunity. As the Emperor made his way up the last few steps, she wedged the lightsaber up her trouser leg. She would have preferred it closer to hand in her sleeves, but it would have protruded too conspicuously. Her trouser leg would have to do. It pressed comfortingly into her calf. Even in death, Vader seemed to be watching over her. Palpatine eased himself back on his throne and turned his smirking face to her, a knowing glint in his eye. "No, Princess Leia, it is known to you." As the princess came unsteadily to her feet and faced him, however, he saw nothing of the impulsive fear from earlier that was so easy to manipulate. She appeared to be in somewhat of a daze, but she stared at him as if seeing him anew, as if the full horror of his soul was bared to view. She was numb from Vader's death, Palpatine realized. Vader's arrival had been an unwelcome setback that had robbed an early triumph, but so long as it was handled carefully, the princess would still fall, and fall hard. Just as he considered this new development, the red bars of light rose on the side of the elevator shaft, and its doors slid open. Turning an apprentice was a delicate operation, and Palpatine found his patience being thoroughly tested at this second unapproved disruption. He glowered as Mara Jade swiftly made her way to the throne. Bright green eyes briefly met Leia's as she passed. To Mara's utter perplexity, all she received from the princess was quiet clemency, reminding her all too much of Skywalker. Where was the accusation, the hatred? What was it with these rebels being so compassionate all the time? Mara pushed aside her bewilderment, cleared her mind as she reached the Emperor and knelt before him. Master, I brought this immediately as you wished. Any dense fool would have seen that he was angry at the interruption, let alone someone who had grown up under his tutelage. Palpatine knew that she was subtly reminding him that she was acting as per his orders. While he didn't approve of her trying to influence him in this way, he nevertheless tried to rein in his anger as he plucked the datapad from her proffered hand. The 2 lines of the datapad confirmed what he already knew. Princess Leia was the biological daughter of Anakin Skywalker, and her midichlorian count was one of the highest ever recorded. Sidious was only aware of himself, Yoda, and Anakin Skywalker having recorded higher. He had what he needed. Go now, your work is finished, he snapped. If he hadn't been so absorbed contemplating how to proceed with the princess, he might have noticed the infinitesimal delay before his hand bowed her head. Mara pictured herself as a slab of marble stone, devoid of feeling and expression. Yes, master. She backed away 2 steps before turning and gliding gracefully away. She descended both sets of stairs leading away from the throne, drew level with the princess. Mother Jade, he called, his tone suddenly gentle. She turned instantly. He awarded her a thin smile. You have done well. She firmly held the smooth marble visage in place. Thank you, master. Another bow, another 2 steps backwards, and she crossed the bridge into the elevator. Her marble face remained in place as she strode authoritatively past uniformed officers and troops to the shuttle bay, as she used the Emperor's authority to demand clearance from the shield operator and guided the stock YT-2400 out of one of the many larger hangars on the Death Star. It remained in place as she hugged the curve of Naboo's upper atmosphere to keep clear of the intense battle raging on the far side of the enormous battle station, as she absent-mindedly plotted hyperspace coordinates and pushed the throttle to jump to light speed. Only then, as she rapidly left the Death Star far behind it, her facade crumble. She squeezed her eyes shut, clenched her fists. An afterthought! Nothing more. She hadn't been looking for effusive appreciation. That wasn't the Emperor's style. All she'd needed was the smallest confirmation that her master valued her. There could have been no service more dedicated than delivering Skywalker's single greatest weakness, but her only reward had been the verification that her master had no thought for her beyond her usefulness. It had swiftly been emphasized by his blatant manipulation. The praise, the smile, and kindly voice were all empty gestures to keep her compliant. Everyone is a tool to him. Does he tell you that you are the only Emperor's hand? Skywalker's words echoed in her mind. What had he done to her? Before Geonosis, she would have seen nothing wrong in being dismissed in such a manner. She would have taken the Emperor's praise to heart. It would have motivated her to further devotion. She would have interpreted her master's lack of comment on her wounded state as a silent rebuke to train harder. But now, thanks to that Jedi, all she could see was her master's manipulation and insincerity. Your parents, they died a terrible, unnatural death, Mara. Go to the Sue Recon Center, if only to prove me wrong. She glanced at the navicomputer, only to find that she had already entered the hyperspace coordinates for Imperial Center. She was racing towards a distinct crossroads in her life, faster than the speed of light, and she wasn't at all certain that she wanted to know. Feeling sick, she stared at the ETA counter ticking down. Got it! X2 announced as he successfully sliced into the Death Star network. Han craned his neck to look back at him. Great, which way? X2 squinted at the complex mesh of overlapping 3D blueprints and traced paths onto his smaller computer screen. We're close. Next level up, a sector away. Chewie had been monitoring the security recording of the corridor outside the empty crew quarters where they had holed up. He growled a warning, making Han glance over. You might want to hurry it up there, pal. We've got some old friends heading this way. They drew weapons as a dozen off-duty stormtroopers passed outside the door, helmets tucked under their arms and completely oblivious to the surprise that awaited them within. They began drifting into 2 groups, lingering briefly as they exchanged final words for the day. I'm done, X2 confirmed, disconnecting from the Imperial network and handing a copy to Han. We have 3 possible routes up to the command sector. Han slipped the micro data pad into his pocket. "Ready, boys?" he murmured, one eye on the security recording and the other on the door. Chewie woofed softly. Hands tightened on blasters and rifles. The nearest trooper palmed open the door. It was the last thing he ever did. Chewie swung up with his bowcaster, knocking the man in the jaw and lifting him clear off his feet. Han ducked past. He shot a second and third in quick succession by the time the imps had recovered from their surprise and started firing back. By that point, Chewie had downed another two with a single exploding quarrel from his bowcaster, and the rest of the rebel strike team had charged out into the corridor. Shots rang out in all directions. There were grunts of pain. The rebels made quick work of clearing the corridor using the element of surprise to their full advantage. It was an added bonus that the stormtroopers were exhausted from a double extended shift. Two of the rebel squad suffered minor flesh wounds, but they were quickly strapped up. "You good?" Han checked. Both nodded, unfazed. They were all hardened fighters. "This way," X2 said, leading them off. "There's a maintenance passage that can take us up." The shield operator couldn't believe his bad fortune, as yet another unusual request was directed through his headset. "Command station, I repeat, we're sustaining heavy damage and shields will not hold for long. We need to dock!" "Shuttle Thyderium, the deflector generator cannot be disabled during battle," the operator repeated, his tone rising. What did they think they were going to do? Provide an open avenue for the rebels to target the Emperor? There was swearing on the other end as the Lambda-class shuttle swerved to avoid the proton torpedoes fired from the pursuing B-Wings. "Then I suggest you inform the Emperor that his guest has been polarized," the ship's captain snapped. The operator blanched. "The Emperor's guest?" he squeaked. There was more swearing as the Thyderium was racked by blaster shots. "The man's not here sightseeing in the middle of the biggest offensive we've had against these scum, I can tell you that!" The shield operator could think of nothing worse than delivering such bad news to the Emperor. He briefly wondered if it could be a trap, but they were in an Imperial shuttle, and they were being pursued by a whole bunch of rebel starfighters. He made adjustments to open up a small port in the shield for them to dock in one of the sub-level bays. "Very well, I'm sending the codes over now, but be quick about it." The rebel starfighters chased the Lambda shuttle all the way to the small hangar. They peeled away as the shield closed behind it. And Jujarad's nerves were being thoroughly tested for the third time that day, and he wasn't sure how many more such distinguished personages he could handle. This visitor, however, only had the shield operator's word to vouch for his importance. Jujarad marched up to the shuttle with a squad of stormtroopers in tow, just in case. As soon as he approached the lowered ramp of the shuttle Thyderium, however, he was overcome by the strangest sensation to enter the shuttle alone. "Wait here," he ordered the troops in a monotone. His eyes glazed over as his legs carried him up the ramp and into the gloom. He experienced no alarm or indeed any reaction at all at seeing the hooded man waiting for him within, with a silver and blue astromech droid squatted alongside. "I came alone," the cloaked man said, waving his hand in a vague arc. "You came alone," Jujarad repeated, parrot fashion. "There is no need to search this shuttle. There is no need to search this shuttle. There is no need to keep the shuttle under guard. There is no need to keep the shuttle under guard. You will take me to the Emperor now. I will take you to the Emperor now." The officer promptly turned and exited the shuttle, followed by the cloaked man and the droid. "Return to your posts," Jujarad ordered the waiting troops in a dull monotone before leading the important guest towards the throne room. The hangar fell quiet, leaving only the occasional whirring of distant transports and the humming of machines. In the gloom of the shuttle's interior, there was a chuckle. "That's one heck of a trick." There was a blinding flare, an exploding fireball that engulfed those ships nearby, which hadn't pulled away fast enough. "Admiral, we've lost Urjani!" Akbar didn't linger on the loss of the bulk cruiser. His bulbous eyes were following the scattered blips on his portable display, and he spotted the coordinated intent of 4 Star Destroyers as they navigated in sync through the dense spread of capital warships. "General, justice is next," Akbar warned, turned away. Riken was noting the deployment pattern on his own screen. "Grey Leader, can you cover justice?" Akbar spoke into his comlink. "Valiance, justice, provide mutual cover." "We're on our way," came Sam's reply into Riken's ear, who had overheard Akbar. Riken marked Valiance's position and determined the vulnerable side. "Target Visage and Denunciator," he added. "Copy that, General." Sam confirmed. Riken glanced over at the Admiral. "I don't know what idiot's in charge over there, but I'm sure glad it's not Vader. We'd be in serious trouble if they thought to coordinate their attacks more often." "We would have had no chance against Vader leading such an armada," Akbar readily agreed. His comlink beeped and a heavily encrypted transmission came through. It was a hushed voice in stark contrast to all the intel and orders being hailed on the bridge of Home 1. Admiral, we're in. Finally, the news he had been waiting for. Akbar nodded his large head. Copy, General Maydeen. May the force be with you. He changed to new frequency. General Calrissian, radio fleet. The nefarious murkiness permeating the whole Death Star intensified into a solid wall of evil that hit Luke as soon as the elevator doors opened. The very air in the throne room was saturated with dark tendrils emanating from the Emperor, whisperings of fear and despair that sought to purchase on his mind. Unknown to Luke, he paused, very much as his father had done, reinforcing his focus within the living force before stepping forward, alone, onto the shining black floor. From the dais across the bridge spanning the huge humming chasm in which the elevator shaft stood, Palpatine's pulverant voice floated down to him. Welcome, young Skywalker. We've been expecting you. Leia was leaning heavily on the rails at the far end of the bridge. She recognized Luke even with the hood, and she watched him approach, desperately needing his soothing presence and yet uneasy from being ridden with guilt. Already shaken by the death of Vader and what felt oddly like regret at his passing, Palpatine's goading before Luke's arrival that Vader had died because of her was festering in her mind. From a certain point of view, it was entirely true. Emperor Palpatine, Luke replied levelly. You have overreached yourself. You will not be forgiven for threatening Naboo. He didn't speak any louder than usual, but his voice rang with a quality Leia had never heard. She could feel his strength, subtle but unwavering. Palpatine sneered in disdain. I am the Galactic Emperor. I don't need forgiveness. Luke drew up beside Leia, searched her eyes. He was concerned by the pain and desperation he saw in her, while also being immensely relieved. She was still alive and very much herself. She had done well to withstand Palpatine and his provocations. Luke, she started. Vader, he stopped her, pressing her hand gently. I know, his eyes said. He slipped the hood off his head, shrugged off the cloak, and wrapped it around her shoulders. To all appearances, it seemed that he was simply comforting her, but she felt a concealed blaster bump into her thigh. He nodded to her in reassurance before turning ice-cold eyes on the Emperor. What have you done to Leia? A most unfortunate accident, Sidious drawled with no regret whatsoever. She was caught in the crossfire. With Vader, Luke said as if it needed clarifying. He shook his head in censure as he ascended the first set of stairs. Leia limped after him, in pain but adamant not to leave Luke to face Palpatine on his own. Your empire already destroyed Alderaan, Your Majesty, and you attacked Lord Vader when he tried to prevent you from destroying Naboo. How many more planets will you threaten? Luke halted before the final steps, not wishing to be any closer. He could already feel the dark energy pressing on his nebula of light. Leia spoke up. Would you destroy Corellia? Dinon? Corellag? She had no idea where Luke was going with this, but she could add to his efforts. They were all prominent planets in the Empire, populated by hundreds of species, and for the latter two, fiercely loyal to Palpatine. Sensing Luke's silent encouragement, she tilted her head and added, Imperial Center? I am the master of the Sith, Palpatine snarled. I am the ultimate power in the galaxy. All planets are mine to use or destroy as I wish. And what of the billions, trillions of people who inhabit these worlds? She pressed. They are insignificant, Palpatine spat. Inside he was fuming. This was not how his introduction to the young Skywalker was supposed to go. Life is precious, Luke insisted. You should not treat it so callously. You weren't so concerned when you blew up the first Death Star and murdered 2 million people, Sidious reminded. I had no choice. Alderaan had just been destroyed and Yavin 4 was under target. How many more systems would have followed? Your actions now speak for themselves. The Death Star had to be destroyed. If there had been another way, I would have gladly taken it. Blue eyes narrowed. Which is precisely what brings me here. This time we have another way. At the far end of the throne room, unnoticed by Palpatine, the doors closed silently and the elevator dropped away. In the quiet of the enclosed space, there was a soft, electronic wine. R2 didn't want to leave. He knew the Emperor was evil. He knew the Skywalker twins were in very great danger. He wanted to help. But R2 also knew how vital his task was. Mindful of what the droid would do if he didn't, Luke had taken the time to make sure that R2 understood how much hinged on this. The crucial holo recording was in his data banks. He would transmit it to the given codes, then return for more. Tran's left hand flew through the gestures, through the blast doors, a dozen to the left, 2 dozen on the right. The scanner couldn't specify the exact number or positions of the heat sources, but it would have to do. Medine nodded, and they all readied their detonators. They would rush in, deal what damage they could, and withdraw. Meze set thermal charges all along the edges of the inner blast doors, a detonation overload. He hurried back to join the others crouched around the corner. Medine indicated, "Go!" The explosion thundered down the corridor and left their ears ringing. Even with the built-in sonic wave disruptors in their helmets, they rushed in swiftly, utilizing the blind spot created by the explosion, and immediately they were forced to drop to the ground. They were in no man's land, right in the middle of an existing two-way battle. Heavy blaster fire rained overhead. Barely had the thought occurred to Medine that they either needed to choose sides or withdraw when a Wookiee's angry bellow decided for him. "This way," he shouted as he leapt into a low, rolling dive behind a bank of abandoned computer consoles. Tran and Meze were hot on his heels, throwing themselves down beside him. They were still caught in between the two factions, but at least they now had cover from one side. As for the other... "Chewbacca, is that you?" Medine shouted over the din of blaster fire. "Who are you?" came a shout back. "It's Medine." A pause. "Hey there, General, so good of you to join us." Medine now recognized the inappropriately cheerful response. "Solo! How in the galaxy did you end up here? You sent us to fetch the Death Star, didn't you? So here we are." "You're all here?" "We sure are," Han yelled back as they continued to fire at the Imperials on the opposite side of the large control room. "Hey, is there anything you could do from there to break this stalemate?" Medine had no idea how the task force they'd sent with Vader to Endor had managed to end up here, but he wasn't about to complain. He assessed the layout of the room and their positions. "Come on," he said to the two with him as he snuck further around the curving row of consoles. It took them far enough around that they could see some of the imps hunkered down behind another bank of machines. They were well sheltered in prime position to fire down on the rebels, as Han's group likewise kept them penned in. Each side exchanged fire without being able to break the other's cover. Medine saw the walkway that passed over the Imperials. He gave his orders to the two lads, then, "Ready?" Both nodded. Tran fired at the struts supporting the walkway. Medine began firing on any officer he could get his sights on. The imps, panicked at the sudden change in attack, began firing back. The walkway fell away from the ceiling, scraped down the wall, an ear-splitting screech, and crashed down over them. Several officers were crushed. Others managed to dive out of the way. But that was when Meze chucked a live charge right in the bank of consoles they were hiding behind, blowing up a good section of their cover as well as half of the officers. Han's task force charged up towards them and quickly dispatched the rest. Quiet descended on the room. "Secure the control room," Medine ordered, directing the rebel troops towards the 3 entrances. Han surveyed the bedlam surrounding them and gave a lopsided grin. "Not bad, General." Medine bit back his retort. Did Solo think he was a general for nothing? But then again, he was also unexpectedly impressed. Solo might not be the most conventional of soldiers, but Medine couldn't deny that his fellow Corellian achieved results. His being here in itself spoke volumes. "Likewise, General," Medine replied with slight emphasis. Han looked taken aback for a moment. Though the strategy briefing where he'd been appointed to lead the strike force to secure the Death Star, Medine had been in strong opposition. Han nodded back, and the tension between them dissipated. "If a container clicks open in a deserted shuttle and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound?" In the darkness of the shuttle Tidarium, the latches on the large metal container flicked open. The whole thing parted in two, revealing an airtight space within, complete with light support. There was some shuffling through the shuttle and the empty hangar, but no one was present to bear witness. "This time, we have another way." Did the boy realize he'd just served the upper hand to Sidious on a plate? The Sith Master affected an air of casual indifference. "And here I was, thinking that you were here for the one everyone wanted." He indicated the princess with a waving hand and was pleased to see the boy pause, lack of comprehension breaking his momentum. Luke, don't pay him any Leia began to warn.
It was the princess your father wanted in the end, Sidious said over her. Well, he tried to palm you off on me.
I know my father, Luke replied with quiet confidence. Your lies have no effect on me.
Poor boy, Palpatine murmured. The evidence is there, but are you brave enough to see it? At first you were all he had, so of course he thought he cared for you somewhat. Darth Vader always was sentimental, but you were too well balanced, too easily tempered to be easily turned to the dark side. He shared his grievances with me, you know.
It was possible, Luke secretly conceded. He could imagine the Darth Vader he had met in Cloud City reacting in such a way.
We agreed that he needed to gain your trust, Palpatine continued. He did anything and everything that needed to be done. He aided the rebellion. He even used the light side. It was essential for you to bond with him emotionally, so that he could manipulate your feelings. Oh, some of it was true. He did hate me and he did want to destroy me. Whether he managed to turn you to the dark side or not, you would have been a crucial tool in that endeavor.
Palpatine hid a smile as the Jedi's flickering gaze betrayed his insincerity.
But then he discovered he also had a daughter. She shared his fiery temper and already harbored great hatred and fear. She equaled your force sensitivity but has much greater capacity for darkness.
He intoned in mock sympathy.
You became redundant, my boy.
Leia grabbed Luke's arm. Don't listen to him, Luke. He's been doing this to me too, trying to make me doubt, to make me angry. He's trying to drive me to the dark side. It won't work, Palpatine, Luke insisted against the doubt and resistance battling within.
Of course not, you foolish boy,
Palpatine said patronizingly,
as if it's really that simple.
But this was all part of the game. The princess's fervent desperation not to lose Luke was equally as important as the Jedi's inner struggle. Sidious was a master in the art of manipulation, and he could paint such a convincing picture as to make even the wisest of Jedi doubt themselves. And he had the added advantage of having known the inner workings of Darth Vader's mind. The prize of choosing his next apprentice from the 2 Skywalker children was practically mouth-watering, and he applied himself to the task with relish.
When Darth Vader discovered his daughter, his schemes changed. He still connived to have you join him in his attempt to kill me, but the purpose now was so that I would take you as my apprentice. I would have effectively taken you off his hands so that he was free to take the princess as his own apprentice.
Luke was having to concentrate to keep his breathing steady. He never asked me to help him, he argued.
No, he would have done the exact opposite. He would have showed great reluctance in agreeing to let you fight with him.
Palpatine grinned at the boy's telling silence.
It's a Skywalker trait, you know. Tell them to do one thing and you can be sure they will do precisely otherwise. Argue against letting you accompany him, and he would have been assured of you being there every step of the way, delivering yourself neatly into my hands.
Luke, it's not true, Leia urged softly. Palpatine ignored her, glowered at the boy.
But Vader didn't count on me already being aware of the princess that I had arranged for her to visit me here. He came charging after her to reclaim her and paid the ultimate price for his troubles.
Luke's whole body was tense. It all fit. How else could Palpatine know? It's not true. He still insisted, but his earlier confidence was gone.
You didn't believe his sob stories, did you? About how tragic his life was.
Palpatine's voice was scathing in its mockery.
There were elements of truth in it, to be sure, but his early life was nowhere near as convoluted as we made it out to be. Let's see, what fantastical account did we come up with? Oh yes, he was to be born into slavery. On Tatooine, of course, it was essential to share some common ground with you. Then he was to be freed by some Jedi Knights and a queen of all people after winning some spectacular pod races and leave his poor, dear mother to try to be a Jedi Knight," he cackled.
Darkness and despair clamored all around. Could his father really have been manipulating him all this time?
No, Palpatine continued. The reality was dreadfully dull. It was simply picked up by the Jedi at a young age, as they all were in those days, and joined the Order. Although it was true that he met Amidala when he was a Jedi Knight and she was a senator, and they fell in love despite all the constrictions of their social circles.
He sighed, shook his head.
It was difficult for him. The Jedi didn't appreciate his talents, and the rules banning attachment put him at odds with his love for Amidala. He eventually chose the dark side as a way to develop his true potential and be free to be with his wife.
Grim yellow eyes locked on blue.
But she couldn't accept Darth Vader. He would never have told you about this.
Leia could see what was coming like a stampede of wild bursas barreling towards them. She was frantic. "Luke!"
"And I hate to break the news to you now.
"Don't!"
Your father murdered Amidala."
Dead silence.
"He choked her with the Force, while you and your sister were still growing inside of her."
Luke closed his eyes. Palpatine grinned.
"Sir," X2 called. Madine and Zolo both headed over to where he was tapping away at a console. X2 had hacked a terminal and was accessing the Imperial network. "There's good news and bad news." "What's the good news?" Han asked. "We can override the deflector shield control and deactivate it." "Good," Madine said. "Then the Alliance fleet will be able to destroy the Death Star. After we get everyone off this thing, right?" Han checked. He didn't know what the latest strategy was, since the Emperor's holovised threat had changed the game plan. Leia's still on board. "There may be no choice, General," Madine replied gravely. "If it comes down to us or Naboo, the Alliance fleet will not hesitate. But we're in control of the super laser. Naboo's not in danger anymore." "That's the bad news, sir," X2 interrupted. They stared at him. There was a grim nervousness to the man's voice that they had never heard from the seasoned soldier before. "We don't have control. The super laser is run on an isolated network in the adjoining sector. I can't break into it from here." "What? That's not the worst of it." X2 cleared his throat and stepped back, revealing a countdown on the screen. "The super laser is set to fire automatically on Naboo. Maximum power in less than half an hour." Beyond the fierce battle raging above the Death Star, another fleet dropped out of light speed on a direct course for the Death Star. The telltale outline of Mon Calamari star cruisers visible from afar immediately spelled their allegiance. 2 star destroyers, fastest off the mark, swung towards them in a bid to break their course, but they were vastly outnumbered, and the rebels might as well have had a clear run, as conspired by Akbar. By the time other Star Destroyers and TIE Fighters had managed to extricate themselves from the thick tangle of Imperial and Alliance ships to engage them, the secondary fleet was almost upon the Death Star. Lando kept one eye on his scopes as he led the charge. "This is Gold Leader. All wings report in." "Red Leader standing by," Wedge confirmed. "White Leader standing by," Tycho said. A swarm of TIE Fighters detached themselves from the main hub of fighting and screamed towards them. "Rearguard," Lando sent over the comm. "Keep those Star Destroyers off our tails. All fighters target the ties." The Imperial fleet found itself on the back foot, battling 2 fronts, one side of which was facing rebels fresh into battle. The newly arrived battleships engaged the Star Destroyers in an all-out assault, while the smaller starfighters clashed in furious dogfights. With the arrival of the X-Wings came some of the Alliance's best pilots, and the TIE Fighters found themselves hard-pressed. Despite the Imperials' greater number, even with the 2 rebel fleets combined, the battle remained on an even keel. West was tight on Taichu's wing. 3 of them coming in 20 degrees. Cut to the left, Taichu replied. "I'll take the leader." "Watch yourself, Wedge," Lando warned as he spiraled the Falcon between converging squads of TIE bombers. 3 from above. "Red 2, Red 3, pull in!" Wedge steered his formation in an evasive maneuver as they spun collectively on the pursuing TIEs. Some well-placed shots later, all 6 TIEs exploded into oblivion. All Luke felt was blessed relief. His father had told him it hadn't all been a lie. Palpatine was wrong. His father hadn't just been trying to gain his trust, to mold him into a tool to help defeat Palpatine. If that was the case, then Anakin would never have mentioned his mother. His father had revealed all, regardless of the risk of losing his son, because he wanted to be honest with Luke, to genuinely be as a family. His connection to the light side flared with his rediscovered assurance. How things might have been had Anakin not told him in Theed. "I'm sorry to have doubted you, Father," he said. There was no response. Luke wondered at how only a few minutes with the Emperor could have put him in so much doubt. With years of opportunity to manipulate his father, no wonder Anakin had been groomed for the dark side. He opened his eyes, met Leia's worried gaze. She appeared to have been rendered mute by her concern for him. "You knew?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "I found out just a little earlier." Inexplicably, he smiled, touched her cheek. "It's all right." She frowned, not understanding how it could be. He looked meaningfully into her eyes. "I was right, Leia." Their father was Anakin Skywalker, just as Luke had thought. There was joy and relief at this confirmation, but it was quickly eclipsed by her looming sense of regret that she had so coldly turned him away. And now it was too late. Luke turned to the Emperor, standing tall. "My father did tell me," he announced, with that ringing power back in his voice. Palpatine's face soured hideously as he realized his blunder. He had underestimated the extent to which Vader had wanted to truly reconcile with his son. "You failed, Your Highness. I'm a Jedi, like my father before me." Sidious rose from his throne. He advanced towards them until he was standing above them, only 3 steps between them. His white hands hung like those of a corpse before him, his face macabre. "So be it, Jedi." "Sometimes there are things no one can fix. You're not all-powerful, Annie. Flesh on fire, nerve endings blazing. Something wonderful has happened, Annie. I'm pregnant." A cool caress that breathed awareness into his mind, that shimmered through his body and soothed away the agonizing pain. "Are you an angel?" Anakin found he lacked the courage to open his eyes. What would he see in death? Had the living force accepted him? There was a muted hum, but otherwise all was quiet around him. He could hear that there was no respirator. He felt the faint caress of air over his face in the absence of the mask. Anxiety plagued him. He had failed Leia. What would happen to her? What would happen to Luke? His son wouldn't sit quietly when he learned that his father had rushed off to the Death Star without him. There must be some way that Anakin could still save them. It was this latter thought that drove him to open his eyes. His first impression was a wash of gray. His eyes blurred, unable to determine any depth or distance. He strained to focus. Eventually, he came to the rather puzzling conclusion that he was staring at a flat ceiling. How could the living force have a ceiling? Anakin frowned. The ages-old familiar sound instantly conjured up images of cavernous hallways, circular council chambers, and a ziggurat seating 5 enormous spires. Surely not. Anakin turned and found himself gaping in shock. "Master Yoda?"